So imagine taking a perfectly focused, like beautiful photo on your phone today, and then, I don't know, intentionally smearing dirt on the lens, maybe scratching the glass.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and just completely blurring the focus. And you're doing all of this just so people will actually take you seriously.
Right, which sounds completely unhinged to us now.
Yeah, it really does.
Yeah.
But in the early 1900s, that wasn't a mistake. It was a literal survival strategy for the world's first fine art photographer.
As the only way to get in the door.
Exactly. But to understand why they had to do that, I want to transport you back even further. Let's go to the year 1839.
Oh, the big year.
The big year. This is when the invention of photography was officially announced to the public. And I want you to really paint a picture in your mind of the historical tension of that exact moment. Because artists and academy elites, they were not looking at these heavy, cumbersome wooden boxes and smelly chemical plates as a miracle.
No, not at all. I mean, they were looking at them as a soulless, mechanical threat. It was a true existential crisis for the visual arts because, for centuries, painting was the absolute only way to visually record reality.
Right.
And the value of art was measured by the sweat of the artist, right? The physical brushstrokes, the mastery of mixing pigments over years of training.
I mean, think about that famous quote attributed to the French painter Paul Delaroche. He supposedly looks at one of the very first photographs, and he just declares, "From today, painting is dead."
Which is so dramatic, but you can see why he felt that way.
Totally. Suddenly there's this machine, and you just push a button, and it perfectly copies reality in a matter of minutes. So the critics just crossed their arms and said, well, where's the art? Where's the human soul in a chemical reaction?
The broader cultural consensus at the time was basically that the camera was nothing more than a forensic tool, like a documentary device.
Yeah, just recording facts.
Exactly. They completely dismissed the idea that there could even be a creative mind operating behind that lens.
And that profound historical conflict is exactly what we are getting into today. Our mission for this deep dive is to explore how photography went from being this dismissed, cold chemical record to a celebrated high-end fine art.
It's a massive transformation.
It really is. And we're drawing on some incredibly detailed historical accounts for this. Plus, I should mention early on, this deep dive is a proud part of the Senil Sergi Photography History series. So we are going to unpack the life of the man who basically led this entire revolution, a true visionary named Alfred Stieglitz.
And to really understand how photography crossed that massive chasm from, science to art, we really have to start with a man who was literally sent away to study the science of it.
Right, let's look at his starting line. So Stieglitz is born in 1864 into a very wealthy family in New Jersey. And by 1881, when he's just 17 years old, his family sends him to Berlin.
And they send him to study engineering, of all things.
Yeah, engineering, because they wanted him to have a respectable, rational, practical career.
But, as you might guess, those engineering lecture halls completely failed to hold his attention.
I can imagine.
Yeah. Instead, he ends up drifting into the photochemistry laboratory of a very prominent scientist named Hermann Wilhelm Vogel. And this is where everything shifts.
Because Vogel wasn't just some casual college instructor, right?
Exactly. He was a pioneer. He was actively developing new chemical plates. Because at the time, early photographic plates couldn't actually translate colors accurately into black and white.
Right, like blues would blow out to pure white and reds would turn pitch black.
Exactly. So Vogel was inventing the chemistry to fix that. He was figuring out how silver halide compounds could capture different spectrums of light.
So Stieglitz isn't just learning how to, aim a box and press a shutter.
No, not at all.
He is literally in the lab, learning the deep fundamental science of how light physically reacts to chemical emulsions. He's learning how to manipulate the spectrum itself.
And because of that, he begins to see that the process isn't just a rigid scientific recording. Because he understands the chemistry so intimately, he realizes the camera is actually a highly flexible tool.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, it can capture a completely unique subjective perspective. He starts viewing the lens not as a dead piece of glass, but as a direct extension of the human eye.
And we actually see this click for him in 1887.
Oh, the Italy trip.
Yes. He's on vacation in Italy, and he takes this photograph called A Good Joke. It is this incredibly natural, beautifully balanced composition of a group of Italian peasants just laughing together around a fountain.
It's so dynamic.
It really is. It's so full of life and spontaneity, which was a stark contrast to the stiff portraits of that era. So he enters it into this highly prestigious competition in the UK, and he wins first prize.
Wow.
Yeah. He is in his early 20s, and he is already proving to Europe that he has an eye for capturing human spontaneity, but balanced with absolute technical precision.
Right, he was totally mastering the medium. But taking that mastery back home to America was a completely different challenge.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Phew.
Because in 1890, he packs up his bags, he takes his awards and his deep knowledge of photochemistry, and he moves back home to the U.S. And I kind of like to think of this transition with an analogy.
Oh, let's hear it.
It is basically like spending years in Italy learning to roast and brew the absolute perfect artisanal espresso,
Okay, yeah.
and then returning to an 1890s American town that only drinks freeze-dried instant coffee.
That is a brutally accurate analogy because the American photography scene at that time was honestly a cultural wasteland compared to Europe.
Yeah.
There were no intellectual debates about aesthetics. There were no vibrant camera clubs pushing boundaries.
Basically, people were either taking incredibly stiff, lifeless, commercial studio portraits where nobody even blinks, or they were taking completely flat, topographical landscape shots that were purely meant for geographical records.
Right, just pure documentation.
Zero artistic expression. So faced with this stubborn American public and these elitist art critics who still saw the camera as a machine that did all the work, Stieglitz realizes he has to disguise his art.
He has to play the art world's own game.
Exactly. He needed a strategy to get past the gatekeepers.
And that strategy came in the form of a movement called pictorialism.
Okay, so pictorialism was this style where photographers would intentionally manipulate their prints in the darkroom. They would add blur, they would create these soft, moody atmospheres.
And they would even physically scratch the plates, right?
Yes, to create textures that looked exactly like the brushstrokes of a romantic oil painting. I mean, think about how wild this is. They were doing the 19th century equivalent of putting a vintage, grainy Instagram filter on a perfectly sharp photo just to make it feel more authentic.
They were deliberately trying to make photographs look like traditional paintings.
Which I have to admit, I find a bit contradictory. I mean, if his whole goal was to prove that photography is its own independent art form, why is he trying so desperately to copy painting?
It's a fair question.
Doesn't that just reinforce the idea that painting is the superior medium?
It really does look like a massive contradiction on the surface, but it was a calculated, necessary illusion. It was basically a Trojan horse.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, think about it. If they just walked up to the traditional art academies with sharp, perfectly clear photographs and said, "We are artists, look at what our machine did," the doors would be slammed right in their faces.
Right. The critics would just say, you're technicians, you're not artists.
Exactly. By using pictorialism, Stieglitz and his peers were proving that there was intense, grueling handcraft involved in the process.
A Trojan horse. So they are essentially weaponizing the critics' own nostalgia against them. They are showing the sweat.
They are speaking the only visual language the 19th century art critics actually understood. They were saying, look at how many hours we spent in the darkroom manipulating this image. Look at the deliberate aesthetic choices we made.
Wow.
They used that soft, blurry aesthetic to sneak the camera right past the academic guards.
And he builds an entire ecosystem around this idea. In 1902, he founds a highly exclusive group called the Photo-Secession.
Yes.
And that name is a very deliberate, rebellious nod to the Vienna Secession movement over in Europe. Because for context, the Vienna Secession was a group of avant-garde artists like Gustav Klimt, who literally resigned from the conservative, traditional art academies to create their own independent exhibition space.
Right, they just walked out.
Exactly. So by calling his group the Photo-Secession, Stieglitz is capping into that exact same radical middle finger energy.
He was publicly seceding from the amateur hobbyist camera clubs in America. He brought together these visionary talents like Edward Steichen and Gertrude Kiesebier, and he's essentially declaring, we're not hobbyists, we are fine artists.
But, you know, having a rebel alliance is really only step one. He needed a megaphone to broadcast this philosophy. So in 1903, he launches what might be the most legendary photography magazine in history, Camera Work.
Oh, Camera Work is iconic.
And this wasn't a magazine filled with, like, reviews of the latest lenses or advertisements for tripod stands. It was pure, deep aesthetic philosophy.
It featured essays on the meaning of art, critiques of modern visual culture. But above all, the physical magazine itself was a masterpiece of printing. They utilized a process called photogravure,
Let's explain how intense that process actually is for you listening.
Yeah.
To print the photos in this magazine, Stieglitz didn't just use standard, cheap newspaper ink.
Oh, definitely not.
Photogravure is this painstaking, incredibly expensive process where you essentially use acid to etch a photographic image into a solid copper plate.
Right.
Then you ink the copper, wipe it down by hand, and run it through a heavy, traditional printing press.
Which means every single page of that magazine was fundamentally a handcrafted, standalone artwork.
That's wild.
Yeah. When a subscriber opened an issue and saw Edward Steichen's 1904 photograph, The Flatiron, which shows that famous triangular New York building looming in the twilight like a ghostly tree in a forest, the rich, velvety blacks and those soft grays of the copperplate print were just undeniable.
You literally couldn't look at it and say it wasn't art.
Exactly.
I am going to push back on Stieglitz again here, though. He claims photography is for the modern age, right? A democratic medium.
Yeah.
But then he is locking it up in this highly exclusive, crazy, expensive, elitist magazine process.
Yeah.
Isn't he just replacing one set of gatekeepers with himself?
Well, he was absolutely acting as a gatekeeper. There's no denying that. But his defense would be that he had to build an ivory tower to attack the existing ivory tower.
Fight fire with fire.
Right. He believed that to elevate photography to the status of fine art, it had to be presented with the exact same reverence, exclusivity, and uncompromising quality as classical art. He just couldn't afford for it to look cheap.
That makes sense. But a magazine isn't enough, though. You need walls.
Yes, you do.
So in 1905, Stieglitz opens an exhibition space on Fifth Avenue in New York, famously known just by its address, the 291 Gallery. And we need to really set the scene here, because this was not some sprawling, majestic museum.
No, it was tiny. It was an almost claustrophobic little room.
But it became the absolute epicenter of the American avant-garde.
Because of his genius curation.
Exactly. He didn't just hang up the pictorialist photographs of his friends. Here's where it gets really interesting. He used this tiny gallery to introduce America to radical European modernists.
For the very first time.
Yes, we are talking about Pablo Picasso, Henri Matisse, Paul Cézanne, Auguste Rodin. The American public had literally never seen these artists before. Imagine a 19th century critic walking in off the street expecting a nice traditional landscape and being confronted with a fractured, mind-bending cubist drawing by Picasso.
And the brilliant, silent argument Stieglitz made was in how he actually arranged the room. He would take that shocking Picasso sketch and he would hang it on the wall right next to a pictorialist photograph.
Oh, that's so smart.
Right. By placing them side by side in the same physical space, he forced the critics to view them with visual equality. He didn't even have to write a manifesto explaining why photography was equal to painting. The walls of the 291 Gallery made the argument for him.
The funny thing is, being surrounded by all this sharp, geometric, avant-garde European art day in and day out, it actually starts to change Stieglitz's own brain.
It really does.
He starts looking at the soft, blurry, painting-like photos he has been championing, and he realizes, wait, he doesn't need the Trojan horse anymore.
He realizes that trying to make a photo look like a painting is actually an insult to what the camera does best.
Right.
Because the camera is inherently designed to capture sharp, immediate, geometric reality.
And that exact revelation drives him to arguably his most famous photograph taken in 1907. It's called the Steerage.
Oh, yes.
So he's on a ship heading to Europe. He is up in the first class section, and he looks down into the lower deck, the steerage class, where all the poor immigrants are crammed together. And he takes this perfectly sharp, totally unmanipulated photo.
Now, we have to be very careful with how we interpret this image, because it is so easy to look at the steerage and assume it's a piece of social documentary.
Oh, absolutely.
You look at the crowded lower deck, and you naturally think he's capturing the plight of the poor immigrants.
But Stieglitz himself explicitly said he wasn't looking at poverty at all. He was looking at geometry.
Right.
He was looking at intersecting forms. The round shape of a straw hat on a man's head. The stark, crossing white lines of a pair of suspenders. The hard angles of the ship's mast. And the staircases.
He saw a modernist cubist painting happening in real life.
Exactly. And he used the camera's natural ability to freeze that exact geometric balance in a fraction of a second.
This basically marks the official birth of straight photography. It was the moment photography finally stopped apologizing for being a machine.
Yeah.
Stieglitz is telling the world that they don't need to blur their lenses anymore. They're going to embrace the sharp, unmanipulated reality of the world.
And he kicks the door open for a whole new generation of artists. I mean, you look at someone like Paul Strand, who in 1915 takes that famous Wall Street photo.
Oh, what a shot.
It's incredible. It's just massive, dark, intimidating geometric windows of a bank building with these tiny little human figures casting long shadows as they walk past. It is sharp, it is stark, it is pure modernism.
And Strand could only take that photo because straight photography proved the art wasn't in the darkroom tricks anymore. The art was in the framing, the timing, and the specific vision of the person holding the camera.
But once Stieglitz proved the camera could capture stark architectural geometry, he faced an even bigger challenge. Could a cold machine capture the psychological complexity of a human being?
Which is a huge question, and that question drives him straight into his work with Georgia O'Keeffe.
Oh, yes.
So they meet in 1916. She is a young, completely unknown painter at the time, though they do eventually marry in 1924. And what he does with her in his photography completely deconstructs the idea of what a portrait is even supposed to be.
Because before this, a portrait was basically a literal document, right?
What? It was a picture of your entire face, showing what you looked like, usually wearing nice clothes in a nice room to clearly show your social status.
It was a holistic but completely superficial record of a person.
Exactly.
And Stieglitz just shatters that convention. He takes hundreds and hundreds of photos of Georgia O'Keeffe over the course of years, and they are deeply fragmented. He almost never shows her whole face or her whole body at once.
Right, it's always pieces.
He takes incredibly tight, close-up shots of just the curve of her neck or the shadow resting inside her collarbone. There was an entire series from 1919 just focused on her hands.
And, some of these were highly controversial nudes at the time, but focusing on the controversy really misses the profound artistic shift. He wasn't trying to be scandalous. He was exploring pure form.
It is like he is treating the human body as a vast landscape or a still life. He's proving you don't need a perfect, full replica of someone's face to capture their psychological essence.
Yeah.
When you look at the photos of O'Keeffe's hands, they don't even look like hands anymore. They look like sculpted marble or rolling hills. You feel her creative power, her elegance, her internal life, just from the tension in her fingers.
Because he argued that a fragment, captured with the right light and the right geometry, can actually contain the entire truth of a human being. It was a completely radical, modernist approach to human psychology.
So, having successfully fragmented the human body into abstract shapes, Stieglitz decides to push his vision to the absolute furthest limit.
Here we go.
He decides to sever his ties with earthly, recognizable subjects entirely.
And this brings us to the 1920s and a body of work known as the Equivalence series.
For this series, Stieglitz literally takes his camera, points it straight up at the sky, and takes photos of nothing but clouds.
Just clouds.
Endless, swirling, shifting clouds in infinite shades of black, white, and silver gray. And what is so crucial to understand about these images is what's missing.
There's no context.
Zero. There is no horizon line. There are no tree branches creeping into the edge of the frame. There is no building to give you a sense of scale. There is absolutely zero orientation. It is the first true abstract photography in history.
The obvious question is, why clouds? What was he actually trying to achieve by removing all context and grounding?
Well, our sources offer this music analogy that I think nails this perfectly.
Okay.
If you are listening to a pop song with lyrics, say, a song where someone is singing about a breakup, those lyrics are telling you exactly what to feel. The story is literal.
Right.
That is what traditional photography is like. A photo of a crying child tells you to feel sad. It gives you a literal story that dictates the emotion. But if you listen to a piece of instrumental classical music, there are no lyrics. There is no literal story.
Right, it's just sound.
There is just the pure, raw frequency of the emotion conveyed through rhythm and tone. These cloud photos are the visual version of instrumental music.
Oh, that's beautiful. And that analogy aligns completely with what abstract painters like Wassily Kandinsky were doing at the exact same time.
Yes. They were arguing that you don't need to paint a literal tree or a literal house to evoke a human emotion. Shapes, tones, and lines can speak directly to the soul.
And Stieglitz called them equivalents because he believed these abstract cloud formations were the visual equivalents of his own complex internal emotional states.
Wow.
He finally proved that the cold, mechanical camera could capture the invisible abstract landscape of the human soul.
He literally took photography from a dismissed parlor trick, a chemical novelty, and he dragged it, kicking and screaming, onto the sacred walls of the high art museums.
Which brings this whole journey full circle to you listening right now, because the next time you pull out your smartphone and you snap a picture of your coffee and you decide to spend 30 seconds applying a filter.
Right, maybe you adjust the grain.
Exactly. Or you warm up the color temperature, or you add a little vignette around the edges. You are acting on the exact same instinct that Alfred Stieglitz championed.
It's everyday pictorialism. It is. You are engaging in everyday pictorialism. You are trying to prove that your photo isn't just a cold, digital record of a cup, but something with a personal, human atmosphere. We all want our photos to feel like something, not just document something.
Absolutely.
But I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, something to really chew on after this deep dive is over. Alfred Stieglitz fought his entire life, pouring his own money, his sweat, and his reputation into magazines and galleries, just to give a single physical photograph the exact same weight, reverence, and permanence as a Picasso painting.
He wanted us to stop and stare at a photograph for hours.
Right, to appreciate the chemical mastery and the artistic vision. So what do you think he would say if he could look at our modern digital camera rolls today? A world where billions of photographs sit unprinted, totally abstract in the cloud, swiped past in a fraction of a second, and perhaps never truly looked at again.